Clara was born on a rainy winter morning inside a city marked by old traditions and deep roots in bullfighting. From the early days of life, doctors warned of their limitations. She would not talk, would not walk like other children, and her communication with the world would be a constant challenge. Still, his eyes said more than 1,000 words. They were deep, attentive, and seemed to carry the soul of someone who had lived a lot. From a young age, Clara watched the world silent, learning from the gestures, the eyes, the sound of the wind in the windows. The humble family has always been by her side. His father was a field helper on a bull-raising farm, and his mother sold homemade sweets in the square. But it was Miguel, the older brother, who understood her speechless. He spoke to her through drawings, whistles, and smiles. Miguel was his hero. Strong, fearless, he dreamed of being a pawn, facing the brastest bulls, and taking the family's name to the crowd's shouts. Clara admired him with a silent devotion, as one who watches a comet scratching the sky, knowing that it is unique, rare, and brief. From a young age, Clara spent hours watching her brother's training in the corral. She was sitting in her chair, almost still, but with her eyes alive. When Miguel looked at her and waved before she rose, it was as if to say, "That's for you." And each time he dominated an animal, her proud smile was her biggest reward. Although I couldn't speak, Clara shouted inside him. And Miguel listened. I always heard. But fate is cruel to those who have sensitive soul. On a sunny autumn day, during an important competition, Miguel fell from the saddle. The bull struck him with fury, and the arena, once full of applause, plunged into a funeral silence. Clara was in the front row. It didn't shout it. It didn't cry. Did not move a muscle. Just stayed there, still, with wide eyes, as if the world had stopped. Because for her, she had stopped. Underscore 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 underscore. After Miguel's funeral, the house plunged into even denser silence than usual. His absence spread throughout the rooms like an ancient perfume that does not go out. The previously overflowed room was just a frozen space in time, boots still leaning against the door, hat over the chair, a belt hanging from the wall with his name embroidered in red. Clara visited that sanctuary every day. He passed his fingers over the objects, feeling in them the presence of his brother. It was like playing the past. Her mother, Maria, seemed to have lost the floor. For weeks, I barely spoke. Just tidying up the house with automatic, dull, eye-glowing movements. At night, lying on the couch, he cried in silence, thinking that Clara would not notice. But Clara realized everything. There was no sound that she would not hear with her heart. His father, a man of few words, buried himself at work. He came back late, exhausted, unable to face his daughter in his eyes, perhaps because he saw in them the reflection of his lost son. Clara, in turn, closed in a kind of cocoon. Before, even with the limitations, she gestured, smiled, pointed out. Now, not even that. His gaze was distant as who lives in another dimension. He spent hours in the backyard, looking at the sky, birds, or just sitting in deep silence. The pain had blocked any attempted communication. How to explain what you feel when you lose the only person who knew how to listen to your world without needing words? And it was in this emotional abyss that Clara began to keep secrets. She wrote with difficulty, but wrote. In small pieces of paper, he counted his memories with Miguel, his pain, his fears. He kept everything in a shoebox, hidden under the bed. It was his only scream. Your only refuge. The girl who never had a voice now talked to the emptiness, and the void was the only one who answered her. The nights became Clara's favorite refuge. When everyone slept and the world seemed to cease her noise, she dragged her wheelchair to the terrace of the house. There, under the starry sky, he found a silent form of comfort. He stared at the firmament as if he could find Miguel between the constellations. Once he had heard his mother say that the good ones saw a star. And since then, Clara believed that her brother now has shone upstairs, stronger and freer than ever. In these lonely dawn, she communicated with him through thoughts. Mentally, he told everything that had happened on the day, as if Miguel was still there, listening to how he did it before. And sometimes the wind blew differently as an answer. A sheet danced on the floor or a singing star crossed the sky. For many, that was chance. To Clara, it was a sign. It was presence. He was his brother saying that he had not completely left her. One night, looking at Orion's constellation, she recalled a story Miguel used to tell. He said heavenly hunters protected those who could not fight alone. You're my warrior changes and I'm your shield, he said. The memory made it for the first time in weeks a tear draft of Clara's face, but not of pain. It was longing, yes, but also gratitude. Miguel continued to live inside her as an invisible guardian. From that day, Clara began to use stars as codes on her secret tickets. When he wrote, he drew a small star next door and kept his box. It was a way to seal the conversation. One way to say, I spoke to you today. His eyes began to carry something new, a fine light, almost imperceptible but real. The pain was still there, but hope was shyly to take up space within his silent soul. The city's arena, known as the Circle of Honor, had remained closed since Miguel's death day. Its dusty stands, the rusty gates, and the silence of the beaten floor now made up an almost funeral scenario. It was as if the space itself had entered mourning. There, where applause and screams of euphoria were once echoed, only the whisper of the wind was heard between the empty benches. For residents, that sacred place had been desecrated by a tragedy, and no one had the courage to reopen the gates. Even those who always was in favor of bullfights seemed now divided. Some said Miguel had died as a hero honoring tradition. Others whispered it was time to rethink everything, that the arena had asked for too much blood. The image of the boy being thrown into the bull and falling lifeless had been filmed by dozens of cell phones and circulated in silence on the conversation wheels, like a digital ghost. And each time the video was seen, another question was born: is it really worth it? Clara spent months without even looking toward the arena. His house was just 4 blocks away, but it was as if that construction did not exist. It was an open wound on the horizon of his life. But one afternoon when the sky closed with dense clouds, she asked her mother to take her there. Maria hesitated. He thought of denying it. But seeing the eyes of her daughter, so firm and determined, she gave in. Pushed the chair to the rusty gates. Inside, everything was as it was on the day of the accident. Clara just watched in silence, and a lone tear ran down her face. It was like looking at the tomb of a dream. From that day, Clara began to make this journey alone. With a lot of effort, he pushed his chair to the arena and stayed there at the entrance for hours. He did not speak, did not gesture, just sat down and watched the emptiness as those who hear invisible stories. People started to notice. And little by little, the city began to talk about Clara again, not as the girl changes, but as the one who still visited the arena. As if, somehow, she was expecting something. Or someone. From a very young age, Miguel was already a different connection with the bulls. While other children were fearful of huge animals, he approached almost hypnotic calm. The creators said he had a bullfighter, but the truth is that Miguel didn't just want to master the bulls, he wanted to understand them. He talked to them as if they were friends, studied their movements, their eyes, their silences. It was as if they spoke the same language. At the age of 13, he was already known as the promise of the city. At 16, he won his first prize in a national presentation. Local newspapers dubbed him El Niño del Silencio, not just for his youth, but always entering the arena in complete silence, without provoking, without screaming. He just looked into the animal's eyes and waited. This is what enchanted the audience, the elegance with which Miguel faced the danger as a dancer between life and death. Many said he was different. That was not just a pawn, it was a soul linked to something larger. But behind all the bravery, there was an intimate motivation: Clara. Miguel said that each time he faced a bull, it was like talking to her. As if, somehow, his courage could lend his sister strength. Before each presentation, he, kneeling next to Clara's chair, took his hand and said, "Today, I will win for both of us." And even without verbal answer, the girl's smile said everything. It was as if she gave her permission to fly, and he flying. When he died, the city lost its idol. But Clara lost her shield, her confidant, her soul brother. And even after his departure, Miguel's image was still around every corner of the arena. Some said they felt their presence there, especially on rain nights when the clouds covered the stars. They said the wind sometimes blowing hard in the stands, as if someone was running for them. They said Miguel was still there, protecting someone. Waiting. Miguel's death was not just a personal event for the family, it was a collective wound. The city, used to vibrating with its jumps and maneuvers, plunged into uncomfortable silence. Church bells played alone the next day without anyone having asked. The trades closed earlier. The flags in public buildings were raised in half-mast. For the first time in decades, the traditional tourist fair has been cancelled. It was as if everything and everyone stopped, unable to move on without the brightness of the young pawn. At the school he studied, his colleagues left their closet intact. The literature teacher, who always encouraged him to write about her experiences in the arena, entered the room with red eyes and could not teach that day. A mural was created with letters, flowers, and photographs. Among them, a striking image: Miguel lowered next to Clara, smiling with a flower in his hair. It was one of her favorite photos. And now he was exposed as a symbol of love and complicity. The bull responsible for the death of Miguel, called Cloudy, became the subject of debate. Some wanted to be sacrificed as punishment as if his death could placate the pain of the city. Others, wiser, remembered that it was just an animal acting on instinct, and to blame the creature was to transfer the weight of the tragedy to where it should not be. The Cloudy creator refused to sacrifice him. He said the animal was restless since the day of the accident, as if it felt guilt or remorse, something no one could explain. While all debated justice, Clara remained silent. But something in his gaze had changed. A different glow had emerged in the following days, such as who carries a mission that cannot yet be said. While the city sank in honors, protests, and speculation, it already began, silently weaving the invisible thread that would connect its destiny to that bull. And no one, not even her parents, imagined what she was about to do. Clara's wheelchair was blue, with silver details, Miguel's gift when she turned 12. He himself chose it and customized, sharing the letter M discreetly on the back as a silent signature. For many, it was just an object of locomotion. To Clara, it was a throne, an extension of his soul. But after his brother's death, that throne looked like a jail. It was as if the world had shrunk and every movement were in vain. In the weeks they followed, Clara refused to leave the house. He spent hours locked in the room, watching the chair to the corner as if she was to blame. The mother was trying to talk, show old videos, but it was useless. Nor did Clara's eyes react. The loss had been so deep that even the small gestures, once full of meaning, had disappeared. It was as if she was anesthetized. A present body, but with the soul wandering somewhere between time and pain. It was on a cloudy afternoon that Clara broke the silence. Without saying a word, he pointed to the chair. The mother understood the request and helped her sit down. There was something in the way Clara held the arms of the seat, firmness. She pointed to the door. Maria, hesitant, pushed the chair out. In the yard, Clara asked to be alone. With effort, he began to move the wheels on his own. Each meter seemed an eternity, but it persisted. I didn't want to depend on anyone to move on. It was the first step, or rather the first spin, towards the unknown. From that day on, Clara began to leave every day. Sometimes I just went around the backyard. Others, I went to the corner and came back. I didn't speak, it didn't smile. But something about it was in motion. It was as if Miguel's absence pushed her, as if the chair that once represented the limit now turned into a crossing. Gradually, the emptiness she carried began to give way to a silent plan, an idea she only knew and that would soon put the whole city again before the arena. Maria, Clara's mother, and Miguel was a fiber woman forged in the deal with the earth, the loss, the pain that are not said aloud. It has always been firm, practical, shuttered hands, and discreet heart. But after Michael's death, his strength began to cracker in silence. In front of his daughter, he kept upright, trying to convey security. But at night, when she believed Clara slept, she collapsed. She sat on the living room couch, hugged her son's pillow, and cried softly, choking the sound in the fabric so no one heard. Clear, however, heard. Even in his silence, he was sensitive to the slightest sign of pain. The mother's tears weighed on her chest like the roar of 1,000 thunders. It was a silent crying, but it cut the air from the house. Mary thought that protecting Clara meant hiding her own pain, but in fact, her daughter needed to see this weakness to understand that pain was shared. And perhaps there he hid the first link between them, the recognition they were trying to survive from the same wound. One night Clara approached her mother during this secret ritual. He pushed the chair to the couch and simply held her hand. Maria tried to hide her face, wipe her eyes, but her daughter did not let go. With his other hand, Clara took one of the tickets she kept in her coat pocket. In it there was only one drawing, 2 stars holding hands. Maria read and collapsed in tears, this time without hiding. He embraced his daughter tightly as if that gesture could hold on what fate tried to tear off them. From this night, the two created a new way of communicating. Clara wrote tickets, left them in the kitchen on her mother's pillow in the clothing basket. In return, Maria began to respond with small gestures, a favorite orange cake, a flower harvested in the backyard, a silent kiss on the forehead. It was little, but it was enough to keep the thread of life throbbing between them. And so, while the city was still crying Miguel aloud, mother and daughter learned, each in their own way, to rebuild a silent bridge over mourning. Months passed since the tragedy, and the city was starting to get uneasy. The arena, despite its recent painful history, was a vital part of the local culture and economy. The traders pressed, the creators wanted to reopen the gates, and the politicians, in the face of the approaching elections, saw in the resumption of bullfights a way to rekindle the pride of the people. Debates began to pop up in the squares, on the radio, the messaging groups. There were those who said that keeping the arena closed was to betray the roots of the city. At the same time, a silent opposition gained strength. Young people organized peaceful protests, painted murals with messages of reflection, and used Miguel's image as a symbol of sacrifice, not glory. He died for a mistake, not for an honor, said some posters. And among all the public and anonymous figures, there was one that remained changed, but whose simple presence on the streets was beginning to say more than any speech: Clara. Everyone knew who she was. And everyone knew she was still visiting the arena as who waits for something that hasn't arrived yet. One day, the city announced that the reopening of the arena would take place with a special presentation in honor of Miguel. The event would be televised, and the main bull of the night would be Cloudy, the same one that had paid the young man's life. The city stopped. Many found cruel. Others symbolic. The newspapers printed headlines such as "The Return of the Black Giant" and "The Most Dreaded Bull in History Returns to the Arena." The climate was tense, mixed between expectation and restlessness. When Clara learned of the news, she had no immediate reaction. He just watched the newspaper left on the table. But that night, did not sleep. He wrote several tickets and tore them. Until, finally, he drew a star on an arena. And below it, a wheelchair. It was your decision, she would be there. Not as a spectator, but as part of the story. And what no one still knew was that that night would mark not only the return of bullfighting, but also the birth of an event that would change everything forever. The city was preparing as in ancient times. Bands were extended through the streets, the central square adorned with red and yellow flowers, colors that represented bravery and tradition. Artists painted Miguel's mural in giant size, showing him with his hat raised and fearless gaze. The great tribute was announced as a historic event, and caravans from neighboring cities confirmed presence. Miguel's name was revered again, but now surrounded by a tense and uncomfortable atmosphere. The announcement that Cloudy would be back to the center of the arena caused controversy. The bull, now with visible scars and the dark look, was treated as a kind of living legend. His creator, Prest, had agreed to display it again, but with one condition: there would be no slaughter. He already proved what he had to prove, he said in an interview. Still, the idea of putting him under the eyes of the public, reliving Miguel's death, seemed more provocation than tribute. While the preparations advanced, Clara's parents were invited to the ceremony. Maria refused immediately. He said he would not celebrate the pain. But Clara, upon learning of the proposal, did not express opposition or support. That same afternoon, he left home alone in his chair and headed to the arena. No one noticed except an old employee who took care of cleaning the place. Seeing her standing there in front of the gates with the wind stirring her hair and her eyes fixed in the center of the arena, he approached and asked, "Will you come in?" She didn't answer. He just stared at the old man so firmly that he silently opened the gate. On the day of the event, the arena was crowded. The stands vibrated with applause and flags. Speeches were made, played songs. But in the heart of the people there was more doubt than enthusiasm. And then, when the moment of the bull's entrance approached, a whisper traveled the stands like a lightning: Clara was entering the arena. Alone. In the wheelchair. Silent. No escort. Without fear. The crowd fell silent. And time inside seemed to stop. Cloudy entered the side of the arena like a living shadow. Its size was imposing, more robust and slow than before, but still with that penetrating look that seemed to cross everything. Its hooves beat the floor with the force of muffled thunder echoing through the entire structure. The pedestrians led him with tension on his shoulders. Even the most experienced avoided looking straight into the animal's eyes. There was something about him that was not explained. It was not just strength, it was a presence that challenged logic. Clara was already in the center of the arena. His chair remained motionless, his hands rested on his lap, and the wind messed up his hair. The white dress that wore slightly shaken, and his eyes were fixed on the door where he would come out. She didn't train. It didn't blink. It didn't run away. He seemed to know exactly what he did. It was as if his soul had made this route 1,000 times before the body. And when the bull finally appeared, the two looked at each other for the first time. An absolute silence fell on the crowd. The bull stopped. He looked at the girl for long seconds. A strange movement traveled his body, not attack, but hesitation. He lowered his head slightly, as who recognizes something. Clara then lifted her right hand without haste and extended her fingers toward her. The bull, in a gesture that no one expected, began to walk. Not with fury, not with impulse, but with a heavy and rhythmic step, as if walking to meet someone from the past. When Cloudy stopped a few meters from Clara, he lowered his head. The cameras captured the exact moment when his eyes met hers. Then, slowly, the animal took 2 more steps, leaned the muzzle in the girl's extended hand, and lay before her, as if she asked for forgiveness, or as if to say, "I remember." A tear flowed from Clara's eyes. The public, astonished, did not dare to make any sound. At that moment, everyone knew they were facing something that could not be explained, just meaning. After the cloudy gesture, the arena remained changed for long seconds. No one knew how to react. The commentator of the live broadcast hesitated, swallowing the words. The official speaker, thrilled, dropped the microphone. It was as if time had suspended its logic. Gradually, some people began to applaud, not by usual, but by commotion. It was not an applause for bullfighting, but for the delivery of two injured beings who recognized themselves in pain, a girl and a bull, victims of the same show. Behind the scenes, the mayor of the city has a panic. It ruined the whole symbolic rite that expected to build around the resumption of bullfighting. Orders were given by the radio, take the bull, take the girl out of the arena. But no one moved. It was as if an invisible pact kept everything frozen. One of the security guards tried to get in the back, but found the locked gate. A thick chain was passed out and locked with a lock. Someone had sealed the entrance. The whole city was watching, at home or in the stands. When it was realized that the current was real, rumors arose. Would it have been Clara herself? Your friends? Activists? It mattered little. What mattered was that for the first time in decades, the arena had been interrupted by an act of peace. The chain at the gate was not a metal barrier. It was a symbol. A statement. A limit set between what the city used to accept and what was no longer willing to allow. Meanwhile, in the center of the arena, Clara closed her eyes for a few seconds. He seemed to hear something that the others could not hear. Maybe it was Miguel. Maybe it was herself meeting her own voice. When the eyes opened again, they stared at the cameras. His right hand also touched the cloudy muzzle and his fingers slowly drew an imaginary star in the air. The audience, standing, broke into applause, not by tradition, but by surrender. Something had changed, and nothing else would be like before. On the morning of the event, Clara had awakened before the sun was born. The room was wrapped in silence except for the slight whisper of the wind entering the window. She knew that day would have weight. He felt him in the bones, in the air, in the accelerated pulse of the world. But there was no fear in his gestures, there was purpose. He dressed calmly with the help of his mother, choosing a white dress that had belonged to his grandmother. Maria tried to argue, to beg her not to be. But when she looked into her daughter's eyes, she understood that the decision was already sealed. Not with words, with soul. Maria spent the morning crying low in the kitchen, her face between her hands, while Clara wrote a single sentence in a note. Today, I speak for Miguel. He doubled the paper and put it in his pocket. Then he arrested his hair with a star-shaped clip, his brother's gift on the last birthday. He descended the house ramp firmly and pushed his chair through the city streets, watching the flags, posters, the anxious faces. Many saw it pass. Some followed her in silence. Others took the hat. No one dared to stop it. In the arena, the mood was by show. High music, horns, street vendors screaming. But all this is broken as dust when Clara appeared before the gate. The guard responsible, surprised, hesitated. She raised her arm and pointed to the center of the arena with a firm gesture. Behind her was already a small crowd of young people who followed her as if she were a kind of lighthouse. The guard opened a passage. Clara advanced. It was the blood day, as they called informally in the city, the resumption of tradition. But what no one expected is that that day would never see blood. On the contrary, would see redemption. Clara's entrance would transform everything. Because there would be no brave, no bravado, no violence. There would be silence, empathy, and an impossible connection to explain. While the arena expected blood, Clara would offer light. When Clara crossed the arena gate, a shiver traveled the spine of all present. That fragile girl in the eyes of the world was advancing alone with her wheelchair, as if each meter traveled carried the weight of an era. The beaten floor seemed to echo with each turn of its wheels. It was the same arena who had witnessed the fall of Miguel and now witnessed the rebirth of something much larger than a tradition. It was history in motion. It was an embodied soul. From the top of the stands, an absolute silence took over. The flags stopped swinging, the screams ceased, the musicians dropped their instruments. Not even the children dared to make noise. Everyone watched as if they were facing something sacred. A child began to cry softly. One lady squeezed a third against her chest. An old bull creator took off his hat and squeezed him against his heart. That was not a common walk. It was a procession of life, mourning, courage, and love. Clara didn't stop. He stared at the center of the arena. When he arrived, he positioned himself at the same point where Miguel had fallen months earlier. He stopped there, immovable, as if he had met a place that was always his own. It was a few seconds just breathing, like who talks to the floor. Then slowly lowered his head, closed his eyes, and waited. No one knew what would come later. But everyone knew something was about to happen. Something that surpassed understanding. And then the side doors opened and Cloudy came. His immense body advanced firmly, but his eyes seemed less fierce. As if recognized the moment. As if they understood that this was not a fight. Clara opened her eyes and stared at him. There was no fear of them. There was delivery. Respect. True. When the bull began to approach, a collective sigh traveled the arena. And in silence, everyone thought the same thing: she's not alone. Miguel is with her. As soon as Cloudy stopped Clara, the tension of the air seemed about to explode. But instead of any sudden movement, what followed was a silent choreography between two wounded souls. Clara, with a slight gesture of effort, moved her hand out of the chair, leaning until her fingers touched the sand from the arena. It was the first time since Miguel's death that she did that. The sand still kept the energy of the past, hot, alive, dense. A sacred field of memory. Touching the floor, Clara not only turned onto the arena, she was linked to her brother. That soil had been the last surface Miguel had played in life. For her, it was not a place of horror. It was a link. A bridge. An altar. And in doing this gesture, it seemed to offer one's pain as a form of understanding. The bull, standing in front of him, watched in absolute silence. No muscle on his body trembled. It was as if he knew that that moment did not belong to him but to her. The television camera, which broadcast live, captured a detail that would be marked forever. The sand was glued to Clara's fingers, and a tear fell from his face, mixing with dust. It was a simple scene, but loaded with meanings. Beside her, Cloudy finally lowered her head. People didn't believe what they saw. A bull, known for the savagery, surrendered before a voiceless girl. It was more than symbolism. It was soul. Clara then raised her dirty hand with sand and landed it over the bull's face. And there, in that brief touch, everything was forgiveness, farewell, connection, rebirth. The audience broke into applause, but soon the silence came back, not out of obligation, but by reverence. When Clara closed their eyes again, many swear they have felt the wind change. Others said they saw, for a moment, a shooting star crossing the sky even on the day. And everyone, without exception, understood that Miguel's spirit was still there. In the sand. In the air. In the gesture. In silence. Throughout the meeting between Clara and Cloudy, there was a detail that mesmerized those who watched: her eyes. They didn't blink. They were like fixed, silent headlights, revealing a soul that no longer feared the pain which had passed through it and turned transformed. They were eyes that did not ask for mercy, nor did they try to impose courage. They were only there, present, delivered. As if they say, I see you. And you can see me. On the other side, the Cloudy eyes also surprised. They did not carry fury, but an ancestral tiredness. They were eyes that had already seen human savagery closely. Who knew the weight of death and the taste of fear? But there, in front of that white-dressed girl, something seemed to disarm the animal completely. He did not see her as a threat, nor as arrested. I saw something familiar in her, perhaps the same look that he had found in Miguel before his fall, the look of someone who did not want to win, but only to be understood. The crowd was petrified. Parents squeezed their children against their chests, reporters forgot to narrate, even the street vendors had stopped. It was as if Clara's eyes had reached all at the same time, crossing the arena and invading the hearts with a truth that did not need to be said. It was the kind of look that only exists in those who suffered too much and yet chose not to hate. A look that offers itself as a mirror and challenges those who face him to change. And that's why, at the end of that moment, no one could flash. Everyone was dipped in that silent exchange. When Cloudy took 2 steps back and lowered his head completely, as in respect, Clara closed her eyes for the first time since she had entered there. It was as if to say, it is done. And with this simple but monumental gesture, she started a new era in that city. One era when looking into the eyes of the other, of pain, of truth became the first step to heal. Cloudy breathed deep. His chest climbed and down slowly like an ancestral drum marking the measure of something larger than the moment. That breath, once a symbol of threat and fury, now conveyed a different kind of presence, that of a being that, even marked by violence, was still capable of peace. The sound was severe, rhythmic, almost human. At that moment he was no longer just a bull. It became a symbol, a black giant who, finally, breathed in peace. Clara listened to each movement carefully. The warm blinds of Cloudy passed his skin like a breeze from the other world. She didn't move. It only remained there, as if the silence and the air between the two were a sacred bridge. With each exhalation of the bull, she felt her own chest calm. It was as if the two shared the same frequency, the same breath, as soul brothers who had met again after a long crossing for suffering. The crowd gradually was beginning to move. But there was no noise. There was no euphoria. It was a kind of collective reverence, a respect that could not be taught, just meaning. Many cried. Others pressed each other's hands as if seeking support to stay there, witnessing an unprecedented miracle. Because that was what it was, the breathing of the enemy turned into a surrender gesture. From the dreaded beast transformed into a living presence of compassion. Then Cloudy gave a last deep breath and, with effort, lay completely next to Clara. That image traveled the world in minutes. It wasn't just a girl and a bull. It was the victory of affection for pain, sensitivity to brutality, the soul over instinct. And at that moment, the arena ceased to be an arena. It became an altar. And the black giant, once feared and hated, now resting, finally, as who finds rest in the heart of those who never judged him. Cloudy remained lying down with his semi-open eyes as if immersed in a state of trance. There was no tension in his muscles, nor warns in his ears. The bull that had already caused the fear of hundreds of men now was there, vulnerable, fully trusting a girl who could not even speak. But Clara spoke to her soul, and the animal listened. Because sometimes the true dialogue is not in the sound, but in the presence that offers itself without demand. The silence in the animal's soul was not empty, it was fullness. He had become part of something larger, something he didn't even understand rationally, but that filled him. On some deep and inexplicable level, Cloudy seemed to know that he no longer needed to fight. That its history, so marked by violence and domination, now had another direction. A new meaning. That silence, shared with Clara, was the most powerful roar that the arena had ever heard. Clara lowered her face, touched the sand by the bull, and drew a turn with her fingers. It was a spiral, the symbol that Miguel used when he talked about restarts. She then looked up at the stands and, without saying a word, pointed with a dirty finger of sand to the sky. It was not a random gesture. It was a call. A reminder. A request. And at that moment, a colder breeze crossed the arena. Many have vowed to feel the presence of something or someone. A breath of soul. Miguel's echo. From there, no one dared to interrupt what was happening. Neither security guards, nor organizers, no politicians. It was as if an invisible force prevented any break from that communion. For the first time, the people were not a spectator of bullfighting. He was a witness to an intimate miracle. The silence that had settled both Cloudy and in Clara was the kind of silence that heals. That whispers truths. That teaches without imposing. And that day everyone learned something they would never forget. While Clear and Cloudy remained side by side, the world seemed suspended. And it was at this moment that Miguel's memory crossed the arena like a silent radius. It was not a common memory of those who hurt. It was a living, luminous memory, as if he were there, present between the sound of the wind and the dust that floated in the air. To Clara, the feeling was clear, she was not alone. He felt his brother by his side, as in the days when he kneeling before her before a presentation with that smile of the world in his eyes. The audience, in silence, began to feel too. Some remembered the boy who helped other pawns before the competitions. Others thought of the boy who brought sweets to his sister and put her on his lap so that he would see the bulls in training better. Miguel was more than a pawn, it was the pulsating heart of the city. And now his absence was filled with a stronger presence than ever. It was as if he'd blown, from somewhere invisible, the scene that unfolded before everyone's eyes. A boy in the stands, only 7 years old, asked his mother, "Mom, is that bull the girl's angel?" The mother, in tears, just nodded. Because in that arena, for the first time, a bull was no longer a symbol of struggle to become a symbol of reconciliation. Miguel's memory floated everywhere. And every tear that fell was also a farewell rite, an acceptance, a cycle that finally closed. Clara then took the ticket she had written from her pocket that morning. "Today, I speak for Miguel." Carefully, he placed him on the sand by the cloudy head. The paper did not flew. He stayed there, immovable, as if the arena floor welcomed him. It was a message not for the living, but for that star boy. And everyone knew, seeing the gesture, that the time of pain had fulfilled its cycle. Which now, Clara carried no longer the mourning, but the legacy. Clara remained immobile for a few minutes, her eyes closed and her head slightly sloping, as if he heard something no one else could hear. And perhaps it really heard. Because her gestures, from the first movement when entering the arena to the act of putting the ticket on the sand, carried precision and reverence that seemed choreographed by another soul. Each action was actually a silent translation from his brother. Miguel was there. Not with the body, but in the details. The way she touched the ground was identical to the way he greeted the arena before each entrance. Lead the right hand, the pause before the deep look, everything was his reminiscence. As if Clara had studied Miguel so carefully for so long that she now interpreted him with her body. But it was not an imitation. It was deeper, it was incarnation. It was Miguel living through her, speaking to the world for the gestures that the voice could never pronounce. In the audience, one of Miguel's old trainers began to cry uncontrollably. She whispered, "It's him. She is doing his rituals." The news spread among the viewers, who began to notice the repetitions, the codes, the references. Clara was not just a touching figure. It was a channel, a living echo of a soul that had not gone completely. And that turned the moment into a collective ritual of memory and transcendence. For the first time, an arena celebrated life, not dominion over death. When Clara lifted her left hand and put her over her chest in a long, deep gesture, there was a commotion. It was a gesture Miguel made at the end of each presentation. And at that moment, the whole city understood Miguel lived in every gesture of Clara. And no need to scream to be heard. Just feel. Just delivered. It was enough to love, enough to carry the other inside. What no one expected that afternoon was to cry. The arena was prepared for shouts, applause, tension, but not for tears. And yet, when Clara put her hand over her chest, in a mirror to Miguel's gesture, a contained cry began to spread through the stands. It was as if, suddenly, the whole city remembered everything that had never cried. The silent deaths, the proudly swallowed mourning, the words never said. Clara had opened with her silence an invisible behalf inside everyone. Even the hardest men, bull breeders, cowboys with thick hands and closed countenance, let their tears escape. It was not weakness. It was recognition. It was as if the unexpected had broken the shell of tradition and touched, finally, the center of what we are, fragile. And beside them, women who had lost children, brothers, or husbands in that same arena cried not in pain, but of relief. As if finally someone had had the courage to return humanity to that space. In the Tribune, a reporter known for his coldness in the coverage of bullfighting abandoned the microphone. He dropped him and simply cried. His words failed. And there, without narration, the image of Clara and Cloudy lying together in the center of the arena became pure poetry. The camera lens trembled as if even the equipment felt the weight of the scene. For the first time, the unexpected had won the script. There was no show. There was truth. And maybe for that very reason, those tears were so necessary. Because not everyone cried for Clara. They cried for themselves. For your silences. The times they swallowed the pain and smiled on the outside. They cried because, when they see a voiceless girl turning a bull into an altar, they understood that love, even silent, can be the thickest force that exists. And that the unexpected sometimes comes not to destroy, but to heal. There was something in the air that could not be named. A feeling that transcended the physical, the visible. It was as if the soul of something or someone was walking around the arena whispering old secrets in everyone's ears. Some felt an inexplicable chill. Others closed their eyes and let themselves take. For at that moment, what was taking over the place was no more commotion, no mercy. It was presence. It was the breath of the soul. Clara was still closed. The hand was resting on his chest, and his breath followed calmly, synchronized to that of Cloudy. Tom seemed suspended. And that's when the wind changed. He blew warmer, firmer, descending from the stands like an invisible cloak. His dress shaved. The sand around him drew small swirls. And who was there, with eyes and hearts open, he felt. He felt as if Miguel had bent down with his sister and silently blow life in his courage. The mayor, who until then accompanied the event of the cabins, was paralyzed. His counselors murmured, asking him to intervene, to assume the microphone, to recover control of the ceremony. But he couldn't, because it also felt the breath. And for the first time in a long time, he remembered the day he watched Miguel carry Clara on his lap. The image came with a frightening sharpness, as if the boy's soul now traveled the corners of the city, remembering what was essential. And then something even more surprising happened. Clara, who had remained silent throughout her life, moved her lips. No sound came out. But who was near? He swears she whispered a name. Miguel. It was not a miracle in the religious sense. It was bigger than that. It was the soul overcoming the flesh. It was the voice of the invisible finding the way to emerge. And in that breath of soul, the city understood, with tears in the eyes and the heart surrendered. Clara did not need to speak, because the whole world at that moment heard her. When Cloudy lay down for the second time, completely surrendered next to Clara, it was as if his own time kneeling before that scene. The world outside was following cars, watches, schedules, and haste. But inside that arena, time bent. Nothing else happened beyond that. It was as if every second stretched its seams to fit all the excitement of the moment. Eternity squeezed within a moment, and everyone knew it. The bull, which had already carried the image of violence and indomitable instinct on his back, now resting with his eyes half-circled as if he finds relief after a lifetime at war. His flanks still climbed and descended slowly. Clara, with her hand in on her hot skin, remained motionless. She didn't smile or cry. It was as if his body became an extension of the silence that involved everything. The cloudy body and her body were no longer two, they were the same gesture. In the stands, children would lie on their parents' lap. Many did not rationally understand what they saw, but they felt in the back of their chest that something there was right. That this was the kind of scene that history books could never translate with justice. A plastic artist, present at the event, began to draw compulsively in a pocket notebook. His hands trembled. Later, he would say he had never been able to reproduce such a true scene and that he had yet failed to try to capture his grandeur. The weather, which for so many years was the clock of bullfighting, applause, from counting to victory or slaughter, now yielded the other logic, that of delivery. And in that absolute silence, time was quiet, respectful, reverent. Because for the first time, there was no hurry for the end. There was no trophy to be erected. Just a girl and a bull, two survivors of a cruel world, stopping time with a gesture that no spectacle could ever stage. The image was simple but powerful, a girl in a white dress, sitting in her wheelchair, with her hand panting over the head of a sleeping black bull. There was no blood. There was no violence. There was no victory in the traditional sense. But there was something infinitely rarer, true. When the photographers present, many of them there only by obligation, reviewed their cameras, they understood what they had captured. And within minutes, the photograph was already crossing borders without asking permission. It was first published in a local newspaper with the title, Clara and the Taurus of Forgiveness. In less than an hour, he went viral. Large international networks disputed image rights, while activists, artists, and even politicians began to share it as a symbol of a new time. In moments, Clara had become an icon, not of disability, not mourning, but of transformation. She had done what no speech, no campaign, no manifesto had managed, touching the collective soul. While the image ran the world, the city, still astonished, was beginning to see with other eyes. The mayor, pressured by the global repercussion, said in an interview that the arena will never be the same. A television channel showed a special about Clara and Miguel. And Cloudy, the bull that once represented death, was called the guardian of Clara in the news. It was as if suddenly everyone had woken up from a long sleep and saw, for the first time, the cruelty they called tradition. But to Clara, the image was not a trophy. It was just a reflection. Something that escaped for seconds of a truth that she had been carrying in silence for a long time. When at night his mother showed the headline on her cell phone, Clara stared at the screen. Then he pointed to the sky through the bedroom window. And with his fingers he drew a star in the air. Because for her that was all that, a conversation between souls. And the world was finally listening. A few days after the event, the country's main television channels frantically disputed the right to interview Clara's family. But the girl refused all the invitations. It was not for fear, no shyness, it was for faithfulness to silence that always defined it. Its truth did not fit in microphones or journalistic scripts. She spoke with her eyes, with the gesture, with the presence. However, something changed when a young reporter named Clara wrote a letter to Clara's mother. In the letter, Clara said she also had a brother, and that, seeing clear and cloudy in the arena, she cried as she had never cried in the face of a story. "I don't want to tell your story, Clara. I want to listen." This letter came to the girl's hands. And for the first time, she responded with a clear gesture. She nodded and wrote in her notebook, "She can come." Only her. The interview would not be in the studio nor in front of the cameras. It would be in the backyard, under a tree where Miguel used to play. Clara arrived with just one camera and a turnover off. They spent 2 hours in silence. Then, gradually, Clara showed her tickets, her drawings, her memories. And at one point, he asked Clara to put her hand over her heart. The reporter obeyed, thrilled. Clara then designed a circle in the air and, inside it, wrote with her invisible fingers, "Everything is still here." That was the only answer Clara needed. He understood that the story was not about what happened, but about what was felt. The story aired a week later with the title, Clara, the Girl Who Taught the World to Hear Silence. There was no dramatic narration, no exaggerated soundtrack. Just delicate images, gestures, short sentences. And in the end, the camera showing Clara watching the stars in the backyard. The repercussion was even greater than the image of the arena. Because now, the world not only saw the scene, I saw the soul behind it. And he understood finally that Clara didn't want fame, no revenge. "I just wanted to hear what was always there, right before the eyes." Clara's interview generated something no organized campaign had ever achieved, a silent but deep revolt. It was not a rebellion of fiery posters or speeches. It was an inner uprising which was born within each viewer when he was seen before that gross, delicate, and impossible to ignore. Thousands of people in large and small cities began to question in an unprecedented way the meaning of what they had so long called tradition. On social networks, spontaneous movements emerged. #Clara, #SilenceAquefila, #Nemesimated. Young people, adults, and even former arenas advocates began to share reports of how the girl's story had transformed them. Some said they stopped going to bullfighting after years of passion. Others said they had never cried before a report, even Clara. It was a revolt that did not fire buildings but burned consciences. In the city of Clara, the impacts were even more visible. The next bullfight, already scheduled for 2 months, was officially cancelled. The cloudy breeder announced that the animal would be retired and would live free on his farm, not out of obligation but out of gratitude. What's more, other creators followed the example. Pawns refused to present themselves. Veterans said they had lost their taste for the arena. And all this happened without a word of protest said by Clara, only with what it represented. At the center of all this was a girl who never asked for anything, that had never demanded justice, which only offered his silence with courage and tenderness. And that's exactly what caused the true revolt, not the scream of fury but the gesture of peace. Because the hearts, once played, do not go back to sleep at the same pace. And at that moment, a new time began, one in which love, empathy, and listening were more powerful again than any bloody tradition. After the events in the arena and the wave of commotion that spread across the country, Clara inevitably became someone different. But not in the sense of fame. She never sought recognition. The change was more intimate, more essential. For the first time, she seemed to fully dwell her body, as if you had rediscovered yourself at that time of total delivery with Cloudy. The girl who once moved cautiously and hid in the shadows of mourning now walked around the city with an aura that inspired silence and respect. The neighbors, once overly careful, now greeted it with the same natural respect that reserves a wise elder. Children began to imitate her, drawing stars on the walls and leaves of the trees. A group of young people founded an NGO with the name Alma Clara, focused on the defense of animals and the inclusion of people with disabilities. Her name became a symbol, but her presence followed, serene, firm, humble. The new Clara was the same, but with the soul of fear. Indoors, the gestures have changed too. Maria, the mother, began to smile more. There was something light in the air, as if the morning had given way to Miguel's living memory. No weight, no knot in his throat. Clara passed the afternoons in the backyard, taking care of the plants with her hands, and at night wrote letters I never sent, mostly addressed to her brother. One day wrote, "Miguel, you lived inside me when everything seemed erased. Now I live for both of us." At school, teachers no longer knew how to evaluate it. She did not respond to the evidence like others, but her designed newsrooms, her illustrated notebooks, and the gestures she made in the room said more than any note. It was at this stage that a writer, impressed by his story, visited her. They sat under the backyard tree and he asked him, "What do you want to be clear?" She drew a star and next to a book. "Want to tell stories?" He risked. Clara nodded. And that's how the new Clara began to be born, not just as a symbol but as a narrator. As a bridge. As a living memory of everything that is possible when you choose to feel instead of reacting. The repercussion of Clara's story was not restricted to her hometown. In a short time, parliamentarians, jurists, and activists began discussing, at national level, the definitive regulation of the end of bullfighting in the country. It was not the first time this debate had come, but never before had such a powerful, so undeniable symbol. Those who advocated tradition were for the first time without arguments. Because it was no longer reason against passion, it was humanity against blind repetition. A bill called Clara Miguel Law was proposed in the Senate with cross-support. It proposed the definitive end of bullfighting as a public spectacle and the conversion of arenas into cultural, educational, and animal protection centers. Many were surprised by the speed of the movement, but politicians knew the whole country was watching. More than that, I was feeling. And against a collective feeling of awakening, there is no opposite vote that is sustained. Some cities have resisted, trying to keep their event calendars. But the popular boycott was overwhelming. Artists refused to present themselves, sponsors withdrawn, cultural banks frozen resources. And in all interviews, the same image returned, Clara with Cloudy. There was no need for words. That scene was already a complete speech. An eternal argument. While the country moved, Clara followed her routine with the same tranquility as before. He avoided the press, did not give interviews, but accompanied everything through the eyes of his mother and the tickets he received from schools, rehabilitation centers, and even bull breeders who had changed their way of seeing the animals. One day, at the end of a report, a journalist asked, "Is it the end of bullfights?" And the matter closed with the image of Clara drawing a spiral on the floor, the resumption symbol. Because, more than an end, what it had inaugurated was a new beginning. Months after the end of bullfighting, the old arena who had once been the scene of tragedies, glory, and shouts now remained with open doors but in absolute silence. No bull stepped on that soil anymore in search of escape. No man there came to prove strength. The sand floor, previously marked by blood and shot, was now swept only by the wind and the slow steps of thrilled visitors. The arena had not been demolished, had been resignified. In the center of it, the circle where Clear and Cloudy had lying down. A local artist sculpted, on the floor, the bronze spiral marked between two names, Miguel and Cloudy. Not as honors, but as bridges between worlds, the human and the animal, the visible and the invisible, the noise and the silence. There, daily, children on tour were sitting in the wheel to hear stories told by educators about empathy, about transformation, about courage without violence. At the top of the stands, no one else shouted. But there were still tears. Many sat there just to observe, to remember, to think. And in silence, many understood things that had never allowed themselves to feel before. The arena, ironically, had become a listening sanctuary, a place where silence spoke louder than any show. It was as if Clara had left not only a gesture there, but a vibration. Something eternal. One afternoon Maria took Clara again to the arena. Alone. They entered without fuss. The girl stopped before the bronze spiral and took a new note from her pocket. He left him on the floor as he had done before. It didn't say much, just, where there's no shout, understanding can be born. They hugged right there in the center of the past. And they walked slowly, without applause, without witnesses, but with the certainty that the silence that restores is stronger than any story that screams. Clara never recovered the speech. And it didn't need to. Because throughout his life, he learned to say what many would never get with words. His silence was not absence, it was a total presence. An absolute listening. She taught the world that the true voice is not in the vocal cords, but in the gesture that carries true, in the choice of not injuring, in the courage to face without raising weapons. Clara's voice was her soul throbbing in slow gestures, in firm eyes, in hands that play without mastering. Her story was studied in schools, recounting in books, adapted for plays, and, years later, for cinema. But Clara never took the stage. I would rather watch from the bottom of the audience where I could feel without being observed. When they asked her she was proud of everything she had done, she responded with a simple note. I just was me. Miguel taught me to continue. And that was the secret. She did nothing to change the world. She was only faithful to who she was, and the world finally stopped to listen to her. Cloudy lived his last years in peace, on a farm where children could meet him, draw it, and learn from his history. Died old, surrounded by care. And Clara went to him the day she left. He sat next to him in silence and drew a last star on the floor. It was a goodbye without pain, just gratitude. Because in Cloudy, she had found that even the monsters that hurt us can also be mirrors of what needs to be healed. Clara died old, with white hair and still bright eyes. Never stopped writing, drawing, listening. Beside him, when he left, there was a box with all the tickets he wrote throughout his life, including the first, written shortly after Miguel's death. It was a small, folded ticket, many times already faded. It was written in it. If I can't talk, I'll feel stronger. And that's what she did. With the voice he never had to scream, Clara taught the world to hear what he had stopped listening, the soul.